The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is a time for another edition of the Hard Rock Empire on this Sunday afternoon, a special mid-afternoon edition of the Hard Rock Empire. I'm Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. Kind of in the middle of a kind of an irregular schedule for us, but things will be getting back to normal this week, and we certainly didn't want to miss the opportunity to bring you the best rock and metal of the week, and we'll be doing that in this edition as always, as we've got a really strong week of music. I was really excited to talk about what was really a couple of weeks in a row where we've just had a really good run of music. So really good stuff this week, plus the latest rock and metal news. We'll bring that all to you. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Yeah, another really good week music-wise. I feel like once we got through that early first part of the year, kind of slow down in releases, once we broke through that and got to like normal weekly schedule, we've seen a lot of really good and really diverse music out there. Not just the same power metal every week or AOR stuff. There's stuff all across the board, and I'm really excited about that. And as far as the news goes, some of these stories, and I think especially the ones pertaining to record labels, it just kind of feels like maybe things are shifting a bit in the industry as far as what legacy acts are going to do to get better promotion maybe, but excited to talk about it.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting week from a news story standpoint. I don't know how huge, most of the news is. There's certainly a couple stories that some fans will certainly have some interest in, so we'll definitely chat about those. And just an update on the schedule, just to remind you, no news podcast tomorrow morning, one more day off from that. We'll be back on Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern with the Nerdcast News Report. And we've got a lot to talk about. Some news has kind of broken over the past few days, and we'll get to that on Wednesday. And then, of course, we'll be back in our regular schedule next week for our Hard Rock Empire. We'll be back at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And a reminder, join our Discord, because if you're not here in the U.S. where we changed clocks this week, that will allow you to see what time in your time zone our podcasts are airing, which will be a little bit different this week after the time change, because even countries that do have a summer time or a daylight savings time, they don't start at the same time the U.S. does. So check your local listings, as we say in the business. But great to have you along with us. Let's get to the news headlines today. And we are going to start off with maybe a little bit of a surprise news story. Now, we get stories a lot about certain people leaving bands, certain people joining bands, and for the most part, we don't really bring them up on the podcast because some of it's just kind of the natural course of things, or it's just bands that generally kind of cycle people in and out. This one was a little bit different, so I wanted to kind of bring it up at the beginning of the podcast. And it's news that broke on Friday that Mastodon has parted ways with their longtime guitarist, Brent Hines. The news was broken on their social media on Friday. He's been with the band, or they've been together for 25 years. And I think, when you have a band like Mastodon, progressive metal act, and you see some of the interviews over the years, it seemed like a group that was getting along pretty well. It wasn't one of those bands that you always would hear in the news about riffs in the band or potential issues. This, at least from a casual standpoint, and I'll certainly get Mike's opinion, he's certainly more in tune with the metal news and the metal scene, but from a casual, it kind of feels like it came out of nowhere, which I think is really what's most surprising about it. Mike, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought too. Granted, I don't pay super close attention to the inner workings of Mastodon, but they've had the same lineup since 2000. That this guy, lead guitarist, also one of their vocalists. They have 3 members of the bands that provide vocals, so it just kind of gives them a unique sound for that reason too. But I always kind of assumed he was one of the big creative leaders of the band. Like, he seems like a guy that has some pretty wild, diverging tastes as far as what you expect from a metal band. But, getting some of the sentiment I saw online on the Facebook posts and the X posts, some people kind of thought this might have been coming for a while. They seem to think that he gave them the impression that maybe he was a little detached from everything for a while, like he wasn't as engaged as he had been in the past. And he has several side projects that he does, ranging from a surf billy band to classic rock bands. I saw one Facebook comment suggesting that they seem to think he's more into country music and psychobilly music. So,
Wow.
um, which in one way is kind of wild because you get the feeling that's probably a large part of why Mastodon's so different
Hmm.
from a lot of the metal and progressive metal that you hear on a regular basis. But it could also, over time, just you find yourself thinking, okay, I just don't really feel like bothering with this anymore. I kind of want to move on and just focus on my own things. I, from a band's point of view, it'll be interesting to hear what changes in the sound of Mastodon moving forward. Like
Yeah.
what about his influence will they now be missing, and how do they fill that gap? And just from a talent standpoint, a guy who provided vocals and guitar, how are you going to fill that gap, and what are you going to do moving forward?
I think these types of things are maybe more interesting with bands that kind of consider themselves progressive bands because there is generally such a wide range of inputs and influences among a band. And not to pick on Megadeth, but you think of Megadeth is Dave Mustaine's vision.
Yeah.
If they bring in a new guitarist, yeah, he may have a little bit of a style, he may bring in some of his own influences, but by and large he's going to conform into what is Megadeth. With these progressive bands, I mean, we saw it with Dream Theater, or we see it with these guys now, when you lose kind of one of those big driving creative forces of the band, you wonder, like, what's the sound going to be? Is it going to be a big pivot, or is it going to be, are they going to try to keep the sound generally the same? Are they going to bring in somebody else with even more varied influences that are going to maybe take the band in a totally different direction? I think it's probably a little scary if you're a Mastodon fan, but it could also be kind of cool that you might get something just completely off the wall that might end up being really good.
Yeah, it's hard for me to put myself in that position because I don't know how many bands that I've been a fan of have been kind of at the top level with the same lineup for that long.
Yeah.
That's it's really something to celebrate if you think about it,
Yeah.
that they were able to hang as long as they could with that same core group. It'll be interesting to hear what's next, but I also think 25 years with that lineup, they've probably maxed out what they were going to do with that configuration. Let's hear what they sound like next.
Yeah, for sure. I think, sometimes these sorts of things after 25 years could be good for both parties involved. Could be good for him to get to do something that's maybe a little more creatively stimulating at this point of his career, and good for them that maybe there's some ideas, maybe there's some different influences they want to explore, and they can kind of do that. So it's going to be fascinating to see kind of what both sides end up doing over the next few months now that they've split. But again, just when you have a group that's together for 25 years and you have somebody that's such a major force in that group and they just go away, it's certainly at the very least shocking. And I think that's why it's worth kind of talking about.
You see comments online ranging from, well, without Brent, it's not Mastodon, all the way to the other end of the spectrum. Well, he's not that important anyway. It's really more about Bran. He's more the guy. So I think people are divided, and they're probably a little nervous to find out what's next.
I think that, I think there's probably some of the negative comments are more nervous about what their favorite band's going to sound like going forward. But we'll see. We'll keep an eye on that. And when they bring some new music to the table, we'll definitely check it out and kind of let you know what we think about that. But moving on, I mentioned Megadeth already. They were in the news as well this week. Of course, we've been talking pretty much at least monthly. There's a story that comes across Blabbermouth or Metal Injection about their new album. They're getting ready. They're in the studio. They've got ideas. They've done riffs. Well, now we're getting a little more kind of understanding about this new album. And really the big news that came out is that they are leaving their label and they're going to be going to a label that is basically backed by Frontiers Records, who we talk about each and every week on this podcast. And they have created a new, what appears to be a metal label, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. I believe it's Black to Black, but it's spelled BLK IIBLK. But they're going to be releasing this new album on this new label. We have, professed how much we enjoy the work that Frontiers does with classic rock and classic metal groups, and now we're going to see them getting into maybe a little more harder metal by bringing Megadeth in. As a Megadeth fan, as a fan of Frontiers Records, your general thoughts on this news this week?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and I would love to know kind of more the details behind the scenes of this. reading through both this article and then there was one from Blabbermouth
Mhm.
talking about it as well. It's kind of wild that like Dave Mustaine has a history with the people who run Frontiers. Like, he talks about how long, he met this guy and this guy years ago, and who would have thought they'd be working together now. Also, kind of an odd thing, as I was reading the Blabbermouth article, I didn't realize that evidently Dave's son is part of the band's management now.
Mm.
Justice Mustaine is mentioned. Like, if you go to his Instagram account, let's see. It actually lists him as artist manager, Megadeth, director of global sponsorships and endorsements, and director of government relations,
Wow.
which is kind of a wild thing. But I mean, why not? I mean, he's got his own like tradecraft imprint. Why not make it kind of a family business thing? And I think his daughter is also a musician into like the country music side of things. But I mean, why not?
Yeah.
I just wonder about the switch. I just like what makes you decide to leave Universal, and my just wild speculation is that when you're a company like Universal, they're probably, if they're not downsizing, at the very least, they're probably looking at ultra old metal band saying, we just don't really have a lot of resources to do anything for you.
Yeah.
And you look at Frontiers, who have loud and proud declared themselves kind of the home of these legacy rock bands. Why not? They started this Black to Black label that back in October announced Biohazard was joining. That was kind of their first big announcement. Why not move a little further to the metal side of things? They already kind of have the arena rock and AOR and power metal stuff on lock. It's wild. And given what we do every week where we see the same few record labels over and over again, it just seems like there are some European companies that are really embracing the idea that they can be the home of hard rock from now on, and that bands can go to them and they don't need kind of the traditional record labels here domestically.
And I think by bringing in Megadeth, you're basically sending a message to a lot of their contemporaries like, hey, whatever company you're still with, whether it's Universal or any number of, big name record labels that you've just had throughout your career, that as you start getting up there in your career, maybe they're not as interested in helping you tour or promoting your album. We're right here. We're willing to do this. And if we can show you that, hey, look what we can do for Megadeth at this stage of their career, here's what we can do for you, that you can't ask for a much better band to sign, because Megadeth's going to keep releasing music. It's going to sound like Megadeth. They're going to tour. Their live shows are amazing. If you're a fan and you haven't seen them live, what are you waiting for? Go see them live. And now you're going to be able to have this new album that's backed by Frontiers, and like you said, they do such an amazing job of promoting these acts that just put out this amazing music, whether they've been around since the early 80s and we're just now hearing of them, or they're a new band that's looking to kind of recapture that sound of the AOR, power metal, whatever it might be. And I think this is pretty exciting, and I think this could, maybe it certainly will help Frontiers. I mean, you're putting Megadeth in there, that's going to help, and it's going to help this new label. But, I think it could help Megadeth as well. I think you could see a little more support, which could allow them to tour in more places and maybe, spend a little money on more money on their new record than they would have, or maybe not have to eat all the costs themselves. I think, you hate to use the cliche win-win, but this sounds about as much of a win-win as you can get.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think that a band like Megadeth certainly has an audience already. They have a fan base that's pretty devoted. Why not sign up with a label that is going to give you kind of that same rock star treatment that maybe you haven't really received since the mid-90s? I think that's probably a large part of the difference. And kind of going back to a story we did a while back with M Shadows and Avenged Sevenfold, talking about touring in new markets, this, to your point, could also kind of help you break into maybe some new areas to tour that you haven't, that maybe Universal isn't really on the ball about getting you to those other countries. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And not to slight Universal, I'm sure they've done wonderful things for Megadeth. But again, it's the economy of the situation. You can have Megadeth, who, yeah, you're still making money on their back catalog, or, you can get a new hot act and push them out there and spend your resources on them. I mean, it's just logical. Do you want to, back a band that might only have another 10, 15 years of being around, or do you want to back a band that might have 40 years of being around? I mean, the money just, dictates that you're going to spend your resources there. And, this is a chance for Megadeth to jump into something new. And again, I think if this goes well, which you would presume that it will, it's going to open the door for more metal acts of that era to see what Megadeth's getting and say, hey, I want to jump on this bandwagon too. And we could see this subsidiary of Frontiers really take off over the next 5 to 10 years.
And kind of getting back to the Universal side of things, just looking at the Google AI overview of artists signed to Universal Music Group, you're looking at Taylor Swift, Drake, Justin Bieber, Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Black Sabbath, Kiss, Korn, Linkin Park, Pearl Jam, other artists, Bob Dylan, Sting, Kendrick Lamar, The Weeknd, Billie Eilish, Alicia Keys, Sabrina Carpenter. Probably, I'm guessing Megadeth probably isn't cracking the top 20 of your top grossing artists. And, as a result, maybe they're better off somewhere else that might treat them more on that level.
Well, what's interesting is there were a handful of kind of new metal bands that you mentioned kind of in the middle of that list.
Yeah.
That you just start thinking, okay, there's some candidates for your next jumps. The bands that are definitely on the more of the end of their career. They're not Kendrick Lamar. They're not Taylor Swift. They're out there still doing music, or they're still out there touring. A jump to Frontiers could make a lot of sense for them somewhere.
And Frontiers
down the road.
isn't alone. I mean, there are several other labels that we talk about a lot, whether it be Reigning Phoenix, Dying Victims, several others. But kind of the repeat offenders that we see on our list week to week that aren't Universal.
Yes, for sure. They're definitely not. But exciting news, and I'm curious to see kind of what comes out of this new partnership and who is next to join up with this new label. One other quick story, and I think part of the reason I wanted to share this story was just because the story itself felt so public relationsy. So I kind of got a kick out of that. But the news did break. We've talked a lot about Ghost in recent weeks. Is the news that they were going to have their new quote unquote front man, V. He was going to be there, and of course it's Tobias Forge again, but a new character. They released their first track in their new album. The song is Satanized. You got a chance to kind of see what this character is going to look like. You got the chance to hear this song, and the song is fine. And I think it's Ghost. You know what you're getting there. I'm really curious to kind of listen to the whole album because, and I know you'll have your thoughts as well. I'm still kind of looking for maybe a little more out of the rest of the tracks on the album than what we got in that first one, but. Again, it's Ghost. They keep finding ways to stay relevant and kind of do things that are just fun. And I think as long as you're not taking your metal too seriously, I think there's probably going to be something that you'll like when this new album when you get a chance to listen to this whole new album.
Yeah, I think the not taking it too seriously part is key because watching the video, it's so cheesy.
It is.
And the song's super catchy. I think it's kind of lacking that really good hook or like mega chorus that you had in songs like Square Hammer and Rats, Dance Macabre. But it's so Ghost. I mean, just so theatric. There's like this really weird dance number kind of in the middle of the video. It's everything you come to expect from them. And the article's hilarious because it talks about the new version of Papa being terrifying and there being a face-melting guitar solo. Like, to me, the song was just a catchy gothic rock song with very poppy elements to it. It's what I expect from Ghost, and I'm fine with that. I kind of get when you read an article like this and kind of the more you think about the presentation of Ghost, why some of the more metal purists might have an issue with them. Like, if you try to sell them as this evil, satanic metal band that's super heavy, I think you're going to draw the ire of people who are into much heavier music. I also think the interesting thing about Ghost that probably bothers some of the more serious metal fans is that they kind of make it obvious that when you do the whole Satanist imagery and lyrical, visual themes, it's just as cheesy as like the overtly Christian metal bands. Like there's no real difference. They all come off as just kind of being silly. But again, if you're writing catchy, enjoyable music, I'm on board.
To me, it's the modern hair metal. What they're doing is very similar to what a lot of the quote unquote hair metal did in the late '80s, which is write catchy songs,
Yeah.
make cheesy videos that
Yeah.
I mean, I just always think when you talk cheesy videos, I think of the video to Round and Round.
Yeah.
Like,
Think of that. I think Motley Crue's Too Young to Fall in Love.
yeah, it's like, those videos are fun. Like there's nothing serious about any of them. And, I think again, people criticize those bands as well, and they still do even to this day, and unfairly so, because again, I think a lot of their musicianship got lost in that labeling of hair metal. But the same thing with Ghost. I think people who are looking for them to be something they're not are always going to criticize them because they're not Norwegian black metal. That's what the imagery makes you think, is that all the Satan this and all this other stuff, and it's this is they're out burning churches. These guys aren't burning anything. Like, these guys are going out and playing pickleball in the afternoon. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's like Tobias Forge took the Swedish AOR music and then raided the closet of a Norwegian black metal band. I mean, that's kind of what you're looking at, and it makes for, again, enjoyable music, but kind of corny presentation.
And I think, unfortunately, because of that combination, you end up losing both of the sets of fans, because you have the Swedish AOR fans that are like, what are you doing? Well, I'm not going to watch this band that looks like that. And you have the Norwegian black metal fans, obviously, that aren't going to watch that because it's not Norwegian black metal. So, again, I think if you know what you're in for with Ghost, you're going to have a good time. And I think that's what they're mostly about, is they're about having a good time making catchy, melodic, gothic rock songs. And if that's what if you know that's what you're getting before you go walk in the door, you're going to have a good time with these guys. And I'm interested in listening to this full album when it comes out. But again, people still misunderstand these guys, and because of that, there will always be critics. That's just the way it is. But definitely check that out. First song is out. You can stream Satanized on your favorite music platform. Real quick before we get started with the new music, just a reminder, if you're listening on our podcast network, which you can do wherever you download your podcast, we won't have the music clips on there. I always like to mention that. But, of course, catch us live on YouTube, catch us live on Twitch, catch us on the VOD on both of those, and hope that the muting doesn't take your favorite song away. And, of course, the biggest thing is you can check out Mike's playlist, which I'm going to post in the chat on both websites at this time. And, of course, the biggest thing is just a reminder how we do this. Mike goes through and pulls a list of all the new albums each and every week, and then we'll go through and pull a track off of those new albums to put on this playlist, which is on YouTube each and every week. And, of course, you can just, follow his page on YouTube, and then you can see when the new playlists go up. You don't have to wait until this podcast to check out that playlist to come up with your own favorite choices of the week. We go through the playlist. We pick 2 new albums to spotlight a piece, and then we bring them to you. And honestly, and I should note, this is the music from February the 21st. This was another really strong week of music. I was really impressed. I feel like we have gotten to the point where we're getting good stuff every week, and more than really what we can talk about. But it makes this fun because it's one good song after another, and you wish we had like 4 hours to spotlight all the new music, but we don't. We try to get this done in about an hour. So check out that playlist. There's going to be some good stuff no matter what you're into. Guarantee there's something on there you're going to like. But it's time to get to the new music. It's time to throw it over to Mike. He gets us started each and every week with the 2 new albums from bands that he's going to spotlight this week. And Mike, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, so before I get into that, I do kind of want to mention, too, that there were a few kind of major act releases that I think warrant some mention. Generally, for our 2 picks, we shy away from them and kind of favor more under-the-radar bands.
For sure.
But, we did have new releases from One OK Rock, the album Detox, as well as Killswitch Engage with This Consequence, both solid. One I wanted to give kind of special attention to, though, is the newest from Jason Bieler, the Baron von Bielski Orchestra. This is a guy who, I've made no secret, and I've talked about it in the past, kind of the main guy behind Saigon Kick. He was the lead guitarist, songwriter, and after their first 2 albums, the lead singer as well. And talk about a band who was so unfairly lumped in with hair metal when from their first album on, it was clear they were so much more than that.
Yeah.
And he's now on to the third Baron von Bielski album, still keeping that going, which is really cool. If you like Saigon Kick's vocal style and you like kind of outside of the box metal, this is definitely something you should take a look at. Dude just puts out good music.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to the full album, but the track on the playlist was outstanding. And again, outside the box, it is definitely one of those things that the guy clearly has some pretty interesting musical influence, which comes through in Saigon Kick, too. I mean, that's, again, like you said, not fair that they got lumped in with so many bands that were really just a one-trick pony. These guys could have been hit, musicians in any era. And it's really cool that he's continuing to do stuff on his own with his own band. And yeah, I'm interested in checking that one out. The One OK Rock track was really good too.
Yeah.
And the Kill Switch Engage track, if you're a fan of theirs, I think you're going to really dig their new stuff as well. So yeah, they're those three really big acts that all had releases this week, and you should definitely check all of them out. But like you said, we do try to steer clear of the really major acts just because they don't need our help getting the word out there. I think they're doing okay. But it's just kind of a sign of this week that you had three major acts as well, in addition to so many others that we won't even get to this week.
Absolutely. So, moving on to my actual first pick. This is the first album from a California-based progressive metal band. I think the album was written and created in 2024, but it looks like they've signed with Wormhole Death, another record label we see pretty frequently, and the album's seeing a February 21st release. The album is Diamantide or Diamantide, and it is a self-titled album, and I'm not sure how they pronounce their name.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Diamantide?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
We'll go with
that. The track on this is one I need to get to as well, because the track on the playlist was excellent, and I'm excited to get to hear this whole album.
Yeah, I was really excited about this. Big fan of progressive metal, and I think when you couple it with female vocals that rock, I think you're onto something that we don't see enough of out there. Band's made up of Nadine Zakarian on vocals, Max Majari on guitars and keyboards, Joe Laundry on drums, and Alex Sandor Thomas on bass. Listening to these guys, you can kind of hear some Dream Theater and Queensryche, which is certainly not a bad thing. I mentioned before, Nadine's vocals have enough rock to keep the band from drifting too far kind of into the symphonic side of things, which I think a lot of times with a lot of female-fronted metal you run into, we hear it a lot, but I'm kind of glad that this still rocks quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few guest appearances on the album to give it a little bit of star power, including Tom England, the guitarist and singer from Evergrey, Roberto Torrente from Labyrinth, as well as Mark Basile from DGM. This album has heavy stuff. It has slower stuff. The song that I picked to listen to is both heavy and then kind of slows down into the chorus. I think it's a really cool song. But if you're into progressive and you want something a little different with it, I think these guys are definitely worth checking out. Standout tracks on the album include Madness, Poor Kings, Born Again, and the track that I picked to take a listen to, the track Fragments of Innocence.
So let's check these guys out. Diamantide or Diamantide, and I apologize, guys. We'll hopefully get it right as you continue on through your career with your new label. But this is the sixth track off of this self-titled album. It is Fragments of Innocence. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, they changed gears about 3 times in that 35 second clip. It was, you have, like you said, the vocalist that rocks. You have, kind of a prog guitar, and then we just come flying in with what sounds like a double kick.
Yeah.
The drums just going to town, and it's just a well-rounded sound. And again, with all progressive bands, we talk about this a lot. You always worry. Sometimes, is there too much going on, because then it gets to be in its way. But these guys have found a way to do all this stuff and yet have it all work together to make this end product just sound so good.
Yeah, it's wild. You had the chorus that slowed it down and felt really like emotive, and you could really, really latch onto it. And then, the guitar part leading out of the chorus sounds like Dream Theater.
Yeah.
Like, just very much like something John Petrucci would play. And then it kind of kicks into almost more of a thrash sound with the kick drum, and just really cool stuff. And the album's full of variety like that.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to listen to the whole album. But check those guys out, Diamantide or Diamantide.
That's the problem when you highlight lesser known bands, is like you can't just find, well, where's that interview on YouTube where they're talking to the members and using the band name
over and over
and
again,
giving me the pronunciation. You can't always find that.
So we will try to get that right going forward. But check those guys out. That really just an interesting, exciting sound from them. But you got a second pick, as always, this week. And this is one I think we'll be able to get this name right, a little more straightforward for us. But what do you got for pick number 2?
Yeah, thankfully, the band that isn't from America has a name that is easy to say. I appreciate that. So I've mentioned it numerous times in the past. I'm a big fan of any kind of traditional metal revival kind of sound, and these guys have it. It's another new band. This is the first full-length album from these guys. They're a Spanish heavy metal band. Album was released by Dying Victims Records. The band is Sinner Rage, and their debut album is Power Strike.
Yeah, I listened to this album, and it was really good, and I would not have guessed until I did a little research myself while I was considering picking these guys, at the fact that they were a new band. It sounds like and looks like a band that has been around for a long time, that is just continuing to release music. But no, this is something new, and it's a really smooth, quick listen, because it's 31 minutes and 8 tracks. But man, it was really, really good.
Yeah, it's wild, because every week I feel like we have that blend of new bands kind of celebrating that traditional metal style with the occasional, this is actually a new wave of British heavy metal band. They've been around since 1978. So you have to take a look and find out, what you're dealing with. And in this case, these guys are a new band. According to the Metal Archives, the band consists of Yara Solis on guitars, Aritz Martinez on vocals, Aritz Yarza on guitars, Javi Riñones on drums, and Danny Speedhammer on bass. Like I mentioned, I'm kind of a mark for any kind of traditional sounding metal band, and here's another. What I enjoy and what this band does that I think the good bands do is that they can capture that traditional metal sound, but not at the expense of sounding modern. I think some bands kind of go too far the other direction, where they want their album to sound like it was recorded on a tape recorder.
Yeah.
And these guys definitely don't. The sound is big. Everything just sounds and feels amazing, like it's all been done on modern equipment. The Bandcamp from Dying Victims, their Bandcamp, the record labels, describes the album as follows. Truly titled, Power Strike is a pitch-perfect throwback to the days when heavy metal supremacy were ruled by the likes of Judas Priest, Saxon, Queensryche, and Crimson Glory. Moving at a disarmingly relaxed strut, Sinner Rage convey charisma and simple yet assured power during every second of this short and sweet tome. And yeah, that is what it is. The album doesn't stay around very long. It's not ultra speed metal. They're not trying to get anywhere necessarily all that quickly. A lot of it's kind of mid-tempo stuff, but it's heavy. It's Aritz Martinez's vocals fit perfectly. It's just another instance where a band, you can tell that they really love that kind of 80s era of metal, and they're certainly doing it justice with the music they're releasing. Standout tracks on the album include Highway Nights, Chained by Night, Angel of Combustion, and the title track, which I picked to take a listen to today, the song Power Strike.
Let's listen to these guys. It's Sinner Rage with their new album, Power Strike, and it is the title track, the first track off of this album, Power Strike. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, first off, man, wish YouTube Music would normalize their volumes on their albums.
Never know what you're going to get.
You never know what it's going to be. The first one was quiet, the second one was loud. Secondly, yeah, as I mentioned, I've listened to this album and it's just really good. Like you said, it's capturing that classic sound without making it intentionally sound classic. And I think the bands that are able to do that, to make it sound like something that came out in the mid 80s without sacrificing the quality of the music, I think that's where you really get it. And clearly these guys get it because it has that classic new wave of British heavy metal type sound, but not at the expense of everything sounding like it was recorded on Pro Tools and not on, a reel-to-reel player back in the 80s.
Yeah, I think there are ways to pay tribute to that sound without sacrificing your own sound. I think, obviously, the music and the songs you're writing go a long way. It could be your visual presentation. You could shoot videos like they were done in 1982. Those are all viable things, but it's 2025. I want your music to sound like it was made in 2025.
For sure.
And these guys totally nailed it.
Yeah, it's great. The whole album's great. Definitely check it out. Center Rage with their new album, Power Strike. Definitely worth checking out this week. As always, I have 2 picks as well. We're going to get things started by heading to one of our favorite countries. The country is Sweden. This is a power metal band from Sweden. It is Enbound with Set It Free. And, we always talk about some of these bands have been around for a while. Some are newer bands. This is a band that's been around a little while, formed in 2006. This is only their 3rd full-length album, though. It's the first one in 9 years since 2016's The Blackened Heart. The band is made up of Lee Hunter on vocals, Mike Cameron Force on drums and keyboard, Marvin Floberg on guitars, and Swede on bass.
Oh.
Yeah.
They named the country after him. He must be pretty good.
He must be pretty good. In fact, he is on this album. When you read the influences from the band members on their website, you kind of understand why their album has so many diverse sounds. Influences range from metal acts like Metallica, Iron Maiden, and Yngwie Malmsteen to progressive acts like Peter Gabriel, Toto, and Dream Theater, to even Michael Bolton listed as an influence. So why not? The sound of the album ranges from AOR to prog rock to power metal. You basically get everything in between. The opening track, Assaulted Taste, has that power metal sound. Track 2, Maximize, starts off with like a prog rock guitar riff. Then they change gears again in track 6 with a ballad-like song with You Never Walk Alone. Regardless of the influences, the whole album is great, and it goes in so many different directions. This is obviously a theme for this week. I love that when you have a band that doesn't just make 12 tracks that all sound the same. It's cool when they're all good, but it's also cool when you can kind of go in different directions. I think these guys have also found a way to do that, and really cool that they've managed to get back in the studio after 9 years. I think anytime you have a band that's been around this long and only has 3 albums, you wonder why you haven't released more stuff, but it's really cool that these guys are back, and they're back with a really strong effort right out of the gate. Standout tracks include Assaulted Taste, Maximize, The Foresight, Bleeding in Your Heart, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast is Overload. So let's check this out now. This is Enbound, the Swedish power metal band, and their new release, Set It Free. This is the 10th track off this album, Overload. So let's listen to a little bit of that now. There's another one of those bands that immediately switch gears after the chorus, and we can't play it this long to play it, but in about another 40 seconds or so, there's a killer guitar solo that runs about 30 to 45 seconds. That is another shifting gears in this song. But again, these guys, a lot of varied influences, and because of that, their sound is very varied as well, but really good sound. Your thoughts on Enbound?
Yeah, I'm not surprised this album ended up making the show. Just based on the track that I picked for the playlist, I kind of felt like they'd be a top contender. It's definitely something I want to give a better listen to after the show because I really didn't get a chance to jump into it fully. But yeah, great sound.
Yeah, really, really excited to hear what these guys continue to do. Great to hear them back in the studio after 9 years and uh, came in with a really strong effort. So check out Inbound, my first pick for this week. Time to get to my second pick, and we are headed to Ireland for pick number 2. This is a melodic rock band from Ireland. It is, I believe, 13 Doors, but it is written in Roman numerals, XIII Doors, with the album Into the Unknown. First off, great use of Roman numerals. Don't see that enough in band names. It certainly made it a little easier to find these guys. This is their debut album. The band is made up of DJ O'Sullivan on vocals and guitars, Flash Murphy also on guitars, Pat Byrne on bass, and Cian O'Sullivan on drums. Again, another band that once you hear the influences, makes a lot of sense. Their influences include Alter Bridge, Alice in Chains, Daughtry, and Tremonti. So you kind of know what you're getting here. It's a fusion of hard rock and heavy metal. But they've also kind of added some traditional Irish, Arabic, and Hindustani traditional sounds into this album as well, which certainly gives it a little bit more variation than maybe just the straight ahead melodic rock. You definitely hear the Alter Bridge, Alice in Chains influences throughout this album. It sounds like a modern version of alternative rock, which I was always a big fan of, still a big fan of. Great driving guitars topped with great harmonic vocals. It's another album that I just really enjoyed from the beginning to the end. And, you know, these guys are getting out on the road. They're going to be touring in support of Michael Schenker's upcoming Irish tour. So the fact that they're going to get on the bill with his, I think he's doing his, like, My UFO Days tour in Ireland. That's really cool for these guys, just releasing their first album. So excited to kind of see them continue to take off. But if this first album is any indication, they've got a bright future ahead. Standout tracks include Unleash the Beast, See How You've Come So Far, Lead the Way. And the track we're going to listen to on the podcast is Face the Truth. So let's check these guys out now. This is 13 Doors with their debut effort Into the Unknown. This is track number 5, Face the Truth. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. But yeah, for a debut album, I really thought they nailed it with this one, and a lot of really catchy tracks on this. I think this is certainly a really strong debut effort, and excited to see what these guys continue to do. Your thoughts on 13 Doors, Mike?
Yeah, I think anytime a band wants to kind of do the modern post-grunge alternative rock sound and they're drawing inspiration from a band like Alice in Chains, you're on the right track. I think what always set them apart to me from the other bands of their era was kind of that dual vocal harmony they had between Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell, and clearly these guys enjoyed that as well because they definitely have the harmony going with their vocals, which I think more modern rock could use. I think that's something we don't get enough of anymore, and when you hear it and you know it's something new and current, it's just really encouraging.
It's almost always something that as we go through these playlists every week, when I hear a band that does it well, that album jumps to the top of my list of the ones that I want to check out the whole album, because it just, again, it's just another level of musicianship. Obviously, it's great when the guitars sound great, the drums and the bass, but like when you can use the vocals as a weapon as well, if you can, you know, make them a little more than just one person singing, I think you can take your album to the next level. I think that's what these guys have done. So check those guys out. 13 Doors, their debut album, and best of luck to them as they go on tour. And, you know, hopefully they continue to climb up the charts, if you will, there in Ireland. But that's going to wrap up our new music for this week. Time to get into the vault, where Mike and I will each give you classic albums that you want to check out. Mike is literally going into the vault and going through some of his classic albums. And we are on to the letter B this week, I believe. And This is obviously a great band that we've talked about on this podcast many times. And tell us a little bit about your vault pick for this week.
Yeah, so I really hadn't landed on a different gimmick to potentially rotate from one to the other, so I opted to just move forward with the vault and go into the letter B. Something I kind of think about when I'm going through the alphabet this time is kind of looking at those albums that I think were kind of influential in getting me into certain bands. That Annihilator album was a big deal last week.
Yeah.
And this one, it's a band that I was familiar with before this album. I'd heard some of their songs, but it was really picking up this CD that made me realize, okay, this is one of my bands. This is something I need to follow, a band I need to continue with moving forward. And this album was a large part of that. Getting into what that is, it is the 8th studio album from the German power metal band Blind Guardian. The album came out in 2006, and it is called A Twist in the Myth.
Yeah, these guys are great. I have not listened to this album, at least beginning to end, but it's definitely on my list now because every track I've heard from these guys is just amazing. So I'm sure this album is awesome.
Yeah, to me, it was a great entry point into Blind Guardian as, top to bottom listening to full albums, especially because at that point I'd already been familiar with Hansi Kirsch and John Schaefer's side project Demons and Wizards, and I think this album is a great companion to listening to Demons and Wizards, so the transition didn't really feel like that big of a deal to me. The album reached number 4 on the German Top 100 chart, 13 on the U.S. Heat Seekers albums, and 21st on the U.S. Independent Albums Billboard charts. I mentioned I was aware of Blind Guardian, but had never really given a full album a listen until this one. What I love about Blind Guardian and Demons and Wizards, and I assume it's really just the people involved, like Hansi Kirsch, and certainly on the Demons and Wizards sides, John Schaefer as well, is the influences that they come up with for the songs on the album. Just kind of getting into this one, you have tracks like This'll Never End being inspired by Walter Moore's A Wild Ride Through the Night. Other Land is inspired by Tad Williams' Other Land series of novels. Fly being influenced by Peter Pan. Carry the Blessed Home, referencing characters from Stephen King's The Dark Tower series, Roland the Gunslinger and Jake Chambers. And then just more generalized things. You have like Turn the Page having references to paganism and Christianity, Scalds and Shadows having Norse references. Just the influences that they put into their songs. Just to me, it's that next level of this is what makes these cool. It's just, they're drawing from something that you already are kind of interested in, and the music and the vocals just enhance that so much. Another cool thing on the album is if you have one of the kind of the special edition releases that have the bonus tracks, there's a song called Dead Sound of Misery, which is essentially the same song as Fly, only the lyrics are different and it's done in a different key.
Oh.
So it kind of gives it this weird, like more ominous tone compared to Fly. It's just kind of a really neat thing and a gimmick that I would kind of like to see bands do more of, because I think that's just a cool way to give yourself a bonus song that's still kind of already a song. It's just, obviously you could spam that too much and it would be lazy, but I think in this case it really kind of gave the album that another just classic track that you have to listen to when you go through it. Standout tracks on the album include This'll Never End, Other Land, Fly, Another Stranger Me, Dead Sound of Misery. If you haven't listened to a full Blind Guardian album, this wouldn't be a bad place to start. I think it's heavy enough to not feel too over the top with the Middle Earth inspired fantasy stuff that they've done in the past as well, which I like also, but I think this still feels metal enough that it's not going to be inaccessible to people.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, both of the stuff they do are good. When they're a little over the top, it's good. When it's maybe a little more grounded, it's good. But yeah, I'm excited to listen to this album and kind of get to hear this one beginning to end and kind of get into maybe one where it's not quite as over the top. And just made me think that the one I did not pick for the vault this week was, I saw Sabaton's The Great War was on 2019. And speaking of over the top, that would be a band that when you think
all of their albums were The Great War.
Yeah, maybe, and it could be. I mean, why hasn't a band done that? We'll just name the album the same thing every time. But yeah, definitely want to check these guys out. What I've heard of Blind Guardian over the years, I've really enjoyed. I think if you're a fan of power metal, you probably already have Blind Guardian in your collection. But if not, this is a good one to start with. Twist in the Myth from 2006. Good stuff there. We are getting to my vault pick, and again, as we've gotten into the later years of this, it has become more and more difficult to pick a vault pick for me. Not a lot of these albums are ones that I've listened to. I ended up listening to 3 of these albums over the last couple of days just to actually hear the whole album. One that's still on the list to play, and I'll let Mike talk about it a little more in detail when I throw it to him at the end, is Moonglow from Avantasia. Came out in 2019. I should know these are all albums that came out in 2019. We're going to do this for one more week, 2020 next week, and then we are going to pivot into Frontiers bands, which I've got an idea for the Frontiers gimmick. What I'm going to do, we'll go through A to Z, but we're going to stay on each letter for 2 weeks in a row. The first week, I'm going to pick a Frontiers act and then pick an album from them and spotlight it. The next week, I'm going to put all the other Frontiers acts with that letter in a randomizer and have it randomly spit out a band, and then put all their albums into a randomizer and have it randomly spit out an album.
That's interesting.
And just see, I just thought, well, that would be kind of fun, just to let fate determine what my next choice is going to be. So we'll be getting to that in a couple weeks. But we're still on the year-to-year thing. Here's 2019. Moonglow from Avantasia came out in 2019. Avantasia is great. Like I said, we'll let Mike talk a little more about this one, but it's one that's on the list to listen to. The other 3 are all ones that I did get around to. Some of them I'd heard some of in the past, but this was a chance to kind of go beginning to end. Baby Metal's Metal Galaxy came out in 2019. To me, as I listen to this one, there are definitely some tracks on this album where it feels a lot like what I really enjoy about Baby Metal. Kind of catchy singing with the metal in the background. There are also some tracks where they're starting to kind of get off that path, and it feels like this kind of set the tone for some of their releases in the 2020s that maybe I haven't been as big a fan of as some of their earlier stuff, but that's just me. If you're a fan of that stuff, it's there, but I kind of more enjoyed their early stuff more, and there's some of that on this album, so it's definitely worth checking out. The Verdict from Queensryche came out in 2019. I had heard a couple tracks off of this. Listened to the whole thing today. It's great. Like, again, Todd Latour coming in. It definitely has a Queensryche feel to it. I think he really did a great job with the vocals on this, and the sound is really good. That's really good beginning to end. I'd encourage you to check the whole thing out. But kind of went off the beaten path for the pick, and every week there's more and more Japanese bands that kind of make it onto the Wikipedia list for bands that have a full album release. And one of the ones this week was a band that we've both been fans of their opening and ending themes. It's the Peggies, and it was their album Hell Like Heaven. So that is my pick for the vault this week. The reason it jumped out at me, and of course, if you are a fan of anime music, the first track on the album is Kimi no Se, which is from Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai. Just a really catchy song. Like, well, we'll start with this one because I'm sure that if this is good, like I'm sure the rest of the album will be good. And it was. It was a really catchy album. If you're a fan of that song, you're going to like everything else that's on that album. It was actually the 3rd single off of that album. They also had a song called Dreamy Journey, which is a ending theme for Boruto. They also had a couple of songs on here that were themes for like regular TV shows as well. Baby was for a show called King's Brunch, and then Tomorrow was a theme song for like the Abema television network for something. I'm not really 100% sure, but really catchy group. The shame of it is this group is no longer active. They disbanded back in 2022. No word on whether they'll ever get back together in Japan. It's just one of those things. Sometimes you have these bands and they're really hot for like a 4 or 5 year period, and then they just stop and everybody goes their separate ways, and it's just nobody ever talks about it again, and they don't get back together. So their anime music's really good. If you're a fan of that, I think you'll definitely dig this album, Hell Like Heaven. And it's kind of sad that they're not making any new music because there's new shows in that Rascal series that continue to come out. And it just feels like it's a little empty without those guys doing it. Probably also explains why they didn't come back for more seasons of Rent a Girlfriend. Now they just want,
Yeah.
I wondered why you would not bring those guys back, and then now I know the answer to that because they just weren't performing music anymore, which is sad. But yeah, catchy album, worth checking out. Of the other stuff that I know that you've heard that I mentioned, and then other stuff that I might have missed, what jumped out at you from this year?
Yeah, so obviously the Avantasia album, Moonglow. Avantasia is always solid. This album, like so many of the others, have just a ton of guests on it, which kind of give it that larger-than-life presentation. You got Hansi Kirsch, Ronnie Atkins, Jorn Land, Candace Knight, Jeff Tate, Bob Catley, Michael Kiske, just anyone who's anyone is on this album. And it's got some great tracks, Ghost in the Moon, Book of Shallows, Moonglow, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. If you like what's essentially kind of like power metal jam project as far as just an all-star team of power metal, there's no reason why you haven't already checked out Avantasia. Children of Bodom released their final album in 2019, Hexed. A band that I've always wanted to get more into, and sadly it wasn't until their final album that I actually bought one of their albums when it came out. Unfortunately, this was a year before Lexi Liho passed away. Dude was just a force of nature on guitar, and just if you're looking for a way to get into kind of more melodic death metal, these guys are a great place to go because the musicianship is so high, and it's just they have that melody that you look for even with the death metal vocals. Some of the good tracks on that include The Road, Glass Houses, Hecate's Nightmare, Platitudes and Barren Words. Just really good album, and obviously worth checking out that band. You mentioned Queensryche. That was, like you mentioned, Todd Latour and Queensryche. They everything they do sounds good. Like, is it the level of Empire or Operation Mindcrime? Maybe not, but it's still very, very good metal.
Yeah.
There were some others that I haven't had a chance to listen to that I still want to. Amon Amarth's Berserker, Blind Guardian Twilight Orchestra, Legacy of the Darklands. I own that, and I've never really given it much of a listen, but it was basically Hansi Kirsch playing by himself with an orchestra.
Oh, wow.
So they didn't even really call it Blind Guardian because it wasn't really Blind Guardian, but I'm sure that's amazing. Let's see. In Flames, Eye the Mask. Big fan of In Flames, but never really gave that the chance that it deserved. Mrs. Green Apple released Attitude.
Yeah.
In 2019, had the song Inferno from Fire Force. And then finally, Sonata Arctica released Talvio in 2019. They're always solid. It may not be my favorite Sonata Arctica album, but still has good tracks like Message from the Sun, Cold, Who Failed the Most, A Little Less Understanding. Solid effort.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've actually heard those songs more on their acoustic releases than I have on the actual album. But yeah, just very solid from those guys. Again, they don't really release bad music. It's just, again, is it, their early stuff? Not really, but it's still enjoyable. And those guys still have a lot of fun playing music, and would love to see them again at some point down the road. They put on an amazing show. But yeah, 2019, like I said, a little thinner. We'll get to 2020, which I'm a little nervous about because it was the pandemic.
It was better than the 2 years prior.
It was.
17 and 18 were rough, but 19, I at least had a decent list of albums to look at.
A little worried about 20 because I just wonder how many albums got pushed back because of the pandemic. We'll see when I open up that list next week. Should be very interesting, but that'll be the last week of the year by years, and we'll jump into something new in a couple of weeks. But with that is going to wrap things up for this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. We appreciate you joining us as always, and we'll be back at our regular time next week, 7 o'clock Eastern time. And again, that may be an hour different than you're used to listening to us because of the time change, so make sure you join our Discord, which is in the link on both the Twitch and YouTube chats. Join us there, and you'll know exactly when we're going to be on the air. We'll be back with our news podcast on Wednesday and Friday this week. The Nerdcast News Report, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. And again, time shift going to be a little different. Make sure you check that out. A lot of big news to talk about on Wednesday. We'll be getting to that coming up this week. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Big thanks to everybody for joining us. Big thanks to Mike for all the work he does putting together this music podcast each and every week. And a big thanks to you wherever you're listening to us, whenever you're listening to us. We appreciate you, and excited about cool things ahead here on the Nerdcast Empire. That's going to wrap things up for the Hard Rock Empire for this Sunday. For Mike and the entire crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.